Good afternoon, everybody, and a warm welcome to this session on mothers and daughters. It feels a bit surreal to be in this space, to have open book after not having had it for such a long while, but to be in this iconic cultural space that we thought we had lost and now can claim back. And a space that I brought both my parents to engage with cultural and artistic performances about our history and who we are. So, it just seems very appropriate to be having the conversation here. Now, I'm going to start by saying that I am bathed in comfort and delight being up here with these three. Yes! So here's an admission. I've got big fangirl love for them. And, with Margie and with Yewande, I don't do social media, it makes me very stressy, but I'm going to admit to having stalked you a little bit, to the point where I was going to Joburg to do something, and I sent Yewande a message saying, "Hello, you don't know me, but I love you very much. Please, can you come and meet and talk with me?" And she was very kind. She tried her best. It was impossible, but so here we are. And then, Pulane, I'm going to admit up front that I'm going to be stalking you, having read your book, and being very excited to get to know and engage with you. So, the three books are pieces of work. They are just effervescent, iridescent, sparkly little gems of words woven together into this rich tapestry. I mean, they're books that really just sat with me for a while. My book is it's on the end there, it's not in the same level, but it's just like someone said I can, so I just squished it in so I can be next to them.
We'll all mother you if you're not careful.
Okay.
Own your work. Not allowed.
Yeah. So I am going to introduce this panel that I don't actually think needs an introduction, and let's start with the Queen of Crime. Margie, can I ask you, while we're here, what happened to Captain Ridwan and Dr. Claire Hart? Did they die a death?
No, they haven't died a death. Captain Ridwan Faisal, at the end of my last book, asked Claire Hart to marry him because she'd had a baby. And she said to him, "I can imagine being one person becoming two with the birth of her baby Ishmael." And she said, "But I can't imagine being two people becoming one." And I've been punished for that line because I just married not a month ago. Yes. So I think Claire...
Awkward.
Yeah, but Claire really annoyed in the background saying, "Okay, you got married, you took my wedding from me, so maybe I'll have to marry her."
But congratulations.
Thank you.
How exciting is that? Hey, can we have a round of applause for weddings? So, Margie needs no introduction, but she's an internationally acclaimed writer, known for the Claire Hart novels, which have been widely translated, and interestingly, deals with violence against women. I actually it's obvious we know this, but I kind of only engaged with that fact in reading your bio data. She has written several works of nonfiction. She's an award-winning journalist, and her latest book is The Eye of the Beholder. Pulane Mpondo, next to her, has a commitment to telling stories of women who the world considers vulnerable and without agency. And what I really loved about your book, Pulane, is how, and as you say at the back of it, it tells the story of the other South Africa, and that brings it to life in a very palpable way. Her aim is to give women with her shared heritage a platform to chant and come undone without shame. How cool is that? She's been published by and contributed to various platforms such as Elle Magazine, Marie Claire, and the UK Guardian. Her debut novel is The Things My Mother Left to Me. Then we have Yewande, who I first saw when I sat many years ago somewhere over there, and her words were just spellbinding. But here's an interesting thing. She's an architect and holds a creative MA from UCT. Her second novel, The Woman Next Door, which I brought with me and you have to sign, was shortlisted for the International Dublin Literary Award and longlisted for the Bailey's Women Literature Prize. And her third novel, An Unusual Grief, is the one that we're talking about today. So I want to start by asking each of you to just briefly, in your own words, without giving away any spoilers, just tell us a bit about what your book is about. And Yewande, if we can start with you and work our way up.
Okay, thank you very much for the warm welcome, and great to be here. And welcome to everybody who's here. It's, as you say, it's wonderful to be here at the festival. It feels really special. An unusual grief, we did this, we practiced, hey. Because yesterday we had a panel, we were given a minute to do the elevator pitch for the book. An unusual grief is, it's a story of a woman who has lived a very, I would say, a very scripted life, a very tight life, and her daughter, her estranged daughter, in her early 20s, takes her life. And Mojisola, who's the mom, is thrown into grief. And she thinks her grief is about understanding this daughter that she was deeply estranged from, but actually her grief is about understanding herself and also unwinding that cord and going off script. And in a nutshell, that's really what it is about. And it's an exploration of grief, but also desire and sex and what it is to be 60 and to have lost your child to suicide.
You know, as a text that deals with grief, it deals with it in such a sensitive and nuanced way that in some ways it's a source of comfort to those of us who are going through grief at having lost someone. We're going to get to the sex part later because, just Pulane?
I wish I had. Where was the practice sessions? Why was I not invited?
You can practice now.
Because I don't know what the book's about. No, I'm not like saying that to be funny. It's like. But no, legit, it's like about a lot.
There's a lot of stuff, right?
It's about a lot.
Do you want to
You know? But when I speak English, I say it's about epigenetic trauma and memory. But seriously, just how memory is transferred from mother to child, specifically girl child, through the womb. Because I came across this idea that babies, girl children inside of your womb already have all the eggs they will have. I didn't know that babies were born with eggs, right?
Yes.
I thought it's something that they develop in life. But it turns out that you're already born with all the eggs you will ever have. So then I thought it was fascinating that when my mom was pregnant with me, I had these eggs. So she was essentially pregnant with her grandchildren.
Yes.
Trippy, right?
Yes.
So then...
And there's something about like you already in your granny. Right?
Yes.
I can't work the science, but apparently it's true.
Yes. So basically everything that... And you know how body stores memory?
Yeah.
So her memories, my grandmother's memories are stored in me.
Yes.
And my kids, and. So just how we relive our mother's lives in weird ways.
And how their history and their stories and their emotions and their everything is encoded in our DNA.
They show up.
They show up,
yes. And because we seldom have conversations with our moms about their lives, then you discover later about, damn, you too? You know what I mean? Yeah. So that's what it's about, and a lot of stuff.
That's a great description of the book. Margie?
That is a lot. The Eye of the Beholder, I think, speaks very much to your book as well. It's about a woman called Cora Berger, who's about 50, an artist, and it's a story of her daughter, her own daughter, and then what I would call her psychic daughter, perhaps. So it's Cora and her own daughter, Freya, and the secrets that the mother has kept from her daughter. So she's lived alongside a woman who has carried a kind of trauma with her forever. I was interested, I suppose, in a nutshell, about what happens if you have a crime that never ends, which in a way is another way of looking at crimes committed against young girls or children. It's a crime that never comes to an end, even if you have a prison sentence for the perpetrator. Then the other daughter is Angel Lamar. She isn't her direct daughter, but in a way they are twin, this older woman and this young woman, because they both know the secrets of a man who disappears at the beginning of the novel. And it was so fabulous to disappear the man right from the beginning. He's just out, really. And it gave this mother and these twin, the light and the dark daughters, the daughter who's felt there's something wrong with her mother all her life. So instead of the mother being hypervigilant, it's this girl from when she's little watching, thinking what's wrong. And it's that thing we inherit, perhaps that we don't know what its words are, but we know it's feeling.
In your body.
In the body, yeah. So it's women and secrets and men who don't get looked for that hard.
I'm telling you, we'll get to this later, but all of their books, the men in all of your books are crying out to be cancelled. I mean, just, I don't know what was going on there, but anyway. So I'm going to start not with the books, but with a personal question, because I'm the boss and I can ask you whatever I want. So I read this thing that says that both telling and listening are shaped by discursive histories. So in any embodied conversation, there are many different fragments of different tellings, which means that as I'm sitting here talking to you and you're talking to me, how we listen and hear each other and how the audience hears us is impacted by who we are, what our experiences are. And I want to link this to a notion of a mother line, so this sort of invisible thread that links women together, and thinking in your personal context, the women of your line, and how we are linked in a physical way, in a psychological way, in a historical way. And I just want to, like that notion sort of a Russian doll, if you open it up, there's one inside, and you open up and there's another one inside. And what you were talking about, Pulane, like how we hold within us, both the woman we are within us, the women who have gone before, and we hold within us the line that will come. So I want to go back to a point in your life where you were shaped by either being on the outskirts, listening to your mother tell a story or tell a story directly to you, sort of a definitive moment that shaped who you are through your own mother and their storytelling. Pulane, because you're looking directly in my eyes, I'm going to go you first.
That's why I was looking away.
Just for that, you are next.
Sorry.
I was like, damn, okay. I don't have a definitive moment, but I think my thing is, and I think this is how I write, is from a place of observation, because I wasn't raised by my mother, right?
Okay.
So it's like you're in a home, but nothing in the home belongs to you. It's not, I don't have my mother or my father in the space, right? It's a shared space, but I see the hierarchies in the space, or who has privilege, because she's super light skinned with curly hair, or she's super cute and like wins all the pageants. And you're this thing that you're still trying to, I wasn't even consciously trying to figure it out, but I was just like, I'm not neither of these things,
Yes.
So for me, like, I think from in that position, I've always just been, I've observed. I enjoy observing. And I think that's where storytelling comes from for me.
Yeah.
Right? Because I'd collected all of these observations and I was like, okay, what to do with them? Does that answer your question?
That's brilliant.
Okay.
Excellent.
Okay.
Top marks.
Okay.
Yewande, now you have to compete with that.
I will, instead of compete, I will align.
You see. Come through.
I was thinking, similar, when you said observation, I was thinking of what's interesting for me is the things that are told but are untold. So it's not hidden and it's not a secret, but is mentioned in a particular way, and then with memory, I think, hang on. So let me explain what I mean. For instance, for a long time, I knew that when I was about 3 months, my grandmother came, took my brothers who were older. We were living in Barbados, where I was born, where my mother was from, and took us to London, where my grandparents had emigrated to. Simple story. It's nothing. many years later, not even when I had kids, but when my brother had a child, and I was holding her, and she was about 3 months, and I knew her mom, and I thought, what would happen for someone to come and take Paida from Tembi? What would that feel like for Paida? What would that feel like for Tembi? What would be going on in a family that kids will be taken? And so the story is, oh, I came to help your mom and I took the kids. And it's sort of normalized. And I thought, there's something more there. And so it feels definitive because, and I'm sort of thinking a lot about this because I'm writing a lot about my mom and my grandmother at the moment. And really trying to understand what my mother could have been going through. It couldn't just be that she was working. There's probably a lot more emotional things that she was dealing with. Immense compassion for what that was, because my father wasn't there either. She was alone in Barbados. And so that feels definitive, and the ways that stories are told in a way that's normal, this is just the family story, and then as an adult you think back and say, hang on, there's a lot missing. And I'm interested in understanding what was missing and making, understanding the emotions, what people were going through, what did that rectify, what was it trying to correct. So that's, and there are many examples like that I have in my family, and I think in families in general, it's a thing.
It's a thing I'm going to loop back to later on, and it reminds me of how, since losing both my parents, I am, when they were alive and they would tell stories, I'd be like, oh, again. And now, that the sense of, I would give anything to tap into their stories, to ask the right questions, to know more, to hold the history. Margie, can we come to you?
Yeah, I want to turn it a little bit. I've got a very talkative family, and, stories are told to create a sense of clan and dynasty and specialness and stuff. But I think the way stories have worked for me sort of come from two ways. In the 90s, I worked as an editor on a wonderful volume called Women Writing Africa, the Southern volume, which was published by the Feminist Press in New York. And I was breeding like a rabbit in those days. So I had 3 little girls who were kind of around. But in looking for women's writing,
They were around.
they were around. They were like hopping around. And my mum and dad are here. They helped me a lot with looking after them. But still, they were very present, those 3. But it was very fascinating to me to find women's writing, women's voices. I had to dig, so I was doing this in Namibia, dig deeper and deeper into the archives. So you'd have a story about a missionary usually, or some horrible soldier, and sort of men that they worked with, fought with, aligned with, whatever. And then through footnotes of footnotes of footnotes, you suddenly found the origin of, say, the stories that were told, kind of myths that were told, were from women's sources. Say, Ochi Herero, for instance, the sources were from these 2 women who'd worked with a missionary. And I thought, our stories are so buried. It was a physical thing of going through 5 different archives to find these stories. And I thought, okay, they're there, and then they went underground. The other area is from myth, like mothers and daughters in myth. So you asked about Claire Hart. She, for most of the 5 books, and then she went on strike on maternity leave when she had her baby, I had the Greek myth of Demeter and Persephone, who gets taken down. And I kept on thinking these sort of murdered and injured and damaged girls and women we have are like Persephones. The goddess of spring who comes back, her mother, Demeter, makes a deal with death, who's taken her that she will go down only for the winter. But what I struggled with in how stories are told is that women are not the agents of story. They're often they're like the beautiful face or the hideous face that triggers the story. But they don't own the story. And it took me 6 novels, and then it was accidental, really, to get women to be the engine of the story. And I was thinking, what has happened? The book, in a way, is what are we in a culture where we're not mothered? Patriarchy means you're not mothered culturally. So what happens to our stories? Men get the baton from Homer, if you're in Greece, all the way down to today. Goes story, 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 man, all the way through thousands of years. But I saw in those footnotes the women's stories get pushed to the side. It's not that they weren't told. So that's how I've thought about mother and daughter story. And I love the egg, you know, that they're always there. You're kind of contained and then producing again. So that was my interest as a storyteller.
And this book, The Eye of the Beholder, is remarkably different from what's come before. And it's, I don't know, I mean, I shared the story with you that when I finished it, I was sitting at night and I closed it and it just sort of sat on my heart. And in fact, with each of these books, there's something very special that is done in all of them. What I like is that in each of the books, motherhood is also problematized, right? It's not this solid sense of self. It's sort of dynamic and comes into itself. It's spatial and over time, sort of finding a sense of identity. But, you know, it shows up the deficiencies and breaking sort of the social and orthodox conventions of what a mother is supposed to be, protective and nurturing and all those things. But in these books, it sort of cracks that open to show the human aspects and the fault lines in the mothers. So again, I want to, Yewande, if you don't mind, start with you. You know, and I think particularly in your book when there's a moment where Yinka comes to her mother and says, or she tries to start a conversation to say that she's sad. And Mojisola does not, I think that there's, you know, at an emotive level, she sort of gets it, but she doesn't have the language for managing this. And it reminds me of my own kind of, sometimes when my daughter speaks, I'm like, blah, 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 I don't know what to say, and I'm supposed to be the mother. So can you talk a bit to that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very interested, and I like when you use the word myth, because one of the books that I read in writing this and researching is the book called The Mother of All Myths by Aminata Fauna. I mean, and it's non-fiction, but it's this interesting sort of according of what motherhood has meant over the ages and in different cultures. And what I loved is, in writing The Mother of All Myths, she also sort of dispels a lot of that mythology. And I was interested in writing about motherhood and writing about the ways, at least in most society, you know, the motherhood box is about this big. Yes. So like you said, and we know what belongs there: loving, caring, cheery, you know, but sexy, dangerous, pissed off, jealous, you know, those things don't, but why not? Why can't, and of course it's not true, we know it's not true. Yeah. So then we live this weird, cobbled, you know, identity, and it doesn't work out. So I was just interested in really looking at that. And I like what you say about language, because I felt as if one of the things Mojisola has to constantly, is faced with actually, is that we don't have language. So because mother also is always knows everything, is right, has all the answers, and that's also not true. But we don't have the language to say, I don't know, to the child. Like if she could have told Yinka in that moment, I don't know how to fix this, by the way. I think what Mojisola is struggling with, and why she can't be with her daughter talking about her sadness, is she doesn't know what to do with that. She doesn't know what to do with her own sadness. She hasn't even spoken her own sadness to herself. Now her child wants to speak her sadness to her. She doesn't know how to navigate all of that, and doesn't know how to say, I don't know. Can we work it out? Those aren't words that belong in the script. So I was really interested in that, in silences and all the things that don't belong in the script that could ease us and give us grace, but that we struggle to find, or it's so hard to find. And becoming a mom myself, I'm very invested in, you know, widening that box so that I don't feel like I'm a failure because I have all these other emotions that apparently don't belong in the motherhood box. And
removing that onerous burden of having to be the resolver of all problems and the fixer of all things.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's seductive. It's a very seductive definition, and I'm seduced by it, like mothers and my own mother, and like motherhood, and that everything person, and it's very seductive. But so we maybe have to be able to do that thing where we can be with two differing identities that not go crazy. we can live and enjoy how seductive it is, because we know mothers are incredible. Yeah. We know that anyway, right? So I'm not taking away from that. But we also have to know mothers are limited. Something I'm really embracing is I am limited. I can't. Sure. Yeah. I'm tired. I'm limited. I can't do that as well after I've done. I can't. And I'm limited, and it's a very freeing thing to acknowledge that I'm limited. I'm not boundless. I don't have everything. The love is, it's unconditional, but it doesn't mean it's limitless.
Yewande, can I just tell you something? Sure. The research was done, and apparently 95% of boys under 8 believe that their mothers have eyes in the backs of their head. So I mean, don't disabuse them, just stick with that.
And my kids, because often I say, Katie, I can see you, so I'm not helping things, because sometimes I'm like, and he sort of, I'm like, oh no, what does he think now? I'm this magician. How did she know?
I think that your words are so liberating. I mean, last Saturday, I was happily reading a book in bed, and so I'm going to add on to that, because what I took away from that is I want to add on that we're allowed to be cowards also. So I was reading my book, and my daughter wasn't home, and I kind of heard this noise, and so I kind of scarily creep out, thinking, is it a burglar? What's going on? And there is the dog with a bird in its mouth, and there's just carnage, but the bird is still alive. So I run to the bedroom and I lock the door and I call my daughter and I was like, you have to come home immediately. And she says, is the bird alive? And I say, it is. And she says, you have to go back out there and be your best brave self and twist its neck and kill it. And I was like, are you crazy? Come home. So, we're allowed to be cowards. We're allowed to ask our daughters to be our mothers. I want to come to your book, Margie, where it's similar. The same dynamic between Cora and Freya. The not sharing of information that then becomes so huge. The silence becomes omnipresent, right?
Well, this is not a spoiler. My lead character, Cora Berger, you sort of see a woman who the trauma in her life has come to a kind of crisis point, and her ability to keep secrets has destroyed her and damaged her daughter, and it's a kind of the 7 days of the time of the book kind of sees everything kind of come to a very satisfying end. I will just say that. But one of the things I wanted to look at in the book, and it comes back to the myth, the novels I wrote, the nonfiction I wrote, has been a kind of drilling down to understand misogyny and secrecy and the nature of patriarchy. And my work, I think, chimes very much with Pumlo, who's sitting there looking so comforting in the front row, to understand why South Africa is so violent and why you get this kind of erasure of women in so many places for reasons that are hard to fathom. And where I've come down on, and some of the book kind of looks at this, is that the one thing that every single human being knows, male or female, is that you are alive because your mother didn't kill you. So she didn't abort you, she didn't drown you, she didn't strangle you, she fed you, she gave you your things. That is why you're alive, which I think women can carry. That's knowledge that women carry more easily because we're allowed to carry vulnerability, we're allowed to carry the shame of vulnerability. Men, if they are conditioned into a certain form of masculinity, cannot take that vulnerability in. And to me, the engine of this hatred, whether it's pornography or images which I look in this, or femicide or rape, is this repudiation of your absolute vulnerability and your whole life to somebody who put you to the breast instead of doing what you had to do to the bird. So I think that if we can get down to, that's a very key part of understanding, I think, violence and secrecy. So that was the kind of bedrock of what I was going. But Cora's secrets, this crime that's gone on, her daughter lives with it all the time. And she tries to talk to her mother, who can't talk about her sadness. So she disappears, she disassociates, she works all the time. So that sort of, and I must just tell you, I mean, people do ask you funny questions about being a creative woman. I remember years ago, a journalist said to me, how do you write with children? And so I said to her, I never write with children, I use a pen. It was the most unfathomable questions. And with this book, I've had a number of questions like, Cora's a bad mother because she leaves her child, she's creative. And I thought she was like me. So I thought she was really good. And she always left, like, you know, there was food in the fridge. And I was thinking, anyway, so I don't... I was amazed. So I was like, I thought she was a good mother.
I had the exact same takeaway, that she's a brilliant mother.
Thank you, thank you.
But I want to pick up on your theme of violence, and so this was something that when I wrote my book, I set out. I didn't know what I was doing, but I knew I wanted to tell a story about violence against women, and that the story was about psychological and emotional violence. Didn't know anything else that was what it was. But in reading your work, it became so clear that a lot of our stories as women, in some ways, has to deal with violence as a theme. And in your book, Pulane, and in Margie's book, it's very clear: violence against women, sexual violence. Yewande, in your book, it's a little bit different because it's sort of the violence we inflict on ourselves and mental anguish. So, Pulane, I want to start by talking about how you work with the theme of violence against women, which, by the way, it transcends all the different pieces in the book, right? And then, when we came to that bit with the 7 angels, can I just say I'm deeply, deeply scarred? That was just this interesting mix of violence, of mothers who condone and are a part of the enactment of violence, but the weird twisting relationship of how we invoke religion to justify the unjustifiable. But also I thought, wow, girl, to create that piece, what goes on in your head? It was amazing, but just wow. Talk to us about how that bit came into being, because it really intricately deals with the nuances of violence in very interesting ways.
It's so strange because I think you're the fifth person to speak about violence, and I don't remember it being violent.
Yeah.
I don't recall it being violent, and I think perhaps I don't recall it being violent because the violence for me wasn't the thing.
Wow.
It wasn't the thing, I was more interested in how they then manage violence.
Sure.
It's not about the thing that's happening to you, because it happens. And there's seldom anything you can do about it. And especially with the kinds of women that I chose to write about, which are on the periphery of society, that are women unlike myself who have access to democracy and the rights that come with democracy. I really am fascinated by how those women live. Like, how do you do it? Because I can do the whole, don't talk to me, talk to my lawyer. I can I can pay, I can take leave and go to the police station. So how do you, who will never have a babysitter because you are a babysitter or a nanny, and you can't take leave because your boss has got this big thing, so you can't take leave to report a thing. So how do you manage? Like, what do you do to come out of that situation, right? Or to manage that situation? And also because I know that they themselves don't look at violence in the way that we would perceive violence.
Yes.
There's a difference in how suburbia or a certain LSM perceives violence versus a different LSM, right? And not that it's, I don't know if the word it's normalized, but it's a way of life. But we nip that shit in the bud, like we sort it out. Whether it be through witchcraft, whether it be through, we pray through it, whether it be we will burn him, but we will nip it in the bud eventually, right? Yes. So the violence, for me, that was my approach to introducing the violence, because it wasn't a whole stop gender-based violence situation for me.
But also, like, when you sort that shit, like the witchcraft, like sometimes it goes a bit wrong, right? Like he eats the snake's head, but then...
I just wanted to ask something about that, if I may.
Sure.
It's really interesting, because in a way, I understand you're talking about people or women who have never developed a sense of outrage at what is happening to them. And that was something I was with what you're talking about. It seems to be so normalized, so used to it, that it's never questioned what's happening and how to work around. Because it seems to me that's one of the most complex things, is a person who's been shaped through a particular form of violence or violation. It feels like home. So you get into a situation again and again because there's a familiarity to that situation.
My thing about it was, or continues to be, that it's not necessarily that they don't have agency. It's just a different kind of agency.
It's a different,
It's a different kind of agency that isn't PR'd, you know? It's not that they don't have rage about it. It's a quiet rage. It's a different kind of rage. And how they address it is different to how the women sitting on the stage or in the audience would. You know what I mean? And it's not, they're not going to be holding up picket signs or, you know, in courtrooms, but they sort it out. You know what I mean? And so all of these stories, although fictional, are based on women that I was raised around. A next door neighbor did some funky things to her husband. You know, the woman that helped raise my children, Mpondo and Uvuyiswa, would tell me these stories. And it's like how, and it's, for me, like going back to that footnote thing you were talking about and erasures, is I would sit and listen and be like, yo, you're a badass. How? You know what I mean? But, and that's why I started writing. Until there's no way that this experience can go undocumented. It is ridiculous how you exist in a space that insists on erasing you, and you don't even care for it to see you. You're not interested in being validated, but you're interested in your survival. You know what I mean? And for me, that kind of tenacity, but she would never call it tenacity. For her, it's just, I mean, it is what it is. It'd be that way sometimes. You know what I mean? And so, not to romanticize it, but I was like, yo, man, you are badass, and the way that you navigate the very dark areas that you go to, you know, whether they work or they don't work, but you go, right? And we will never know about it.
But, you know, I also think that what is interesting and what you capture very beautifully is that they have agency and they sort things out, but there's a juxtapositioning of that with a sense of systemically, the system being pitted against them. So when they escape and they get the taxi and they're going, and then they finally get to Yewande, who's a sex worker, and she gives them shelter for a night, and then they're going back to rescue Nanda. But there's always this sense that in their agency, the system is pitted against them.
It's designed to always reject them. Always.
So Yewande, coming to the notion of the violence that we inflict sometimes on ourselves, and I'm not, you know, like your book does deal with a very serious subject matter of somebody taking their life, but I think also, you know, that's at the extreme end, the day-to-day reality of living in mental anguish over a cumulative period of time is, it is hard, it is a form of, and, you know, when we look at people who cut, who hurt, who self-harm, talk to us a bit about that as a theme in your book.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I wasn't, for a long time, when I started writing the book, similar when you were saying what you started with your book, what I started with was I wanted to write about death and sort of mother-daughter, but I didn't, firstly, I didn't think Yinka had took her life. I had taken her life. I didn't think that's what the story was. I knew she was dead, and I made up other things, or I thought, okay, I won't address why, the reader doesn't need to know, I don't know. And it wasn't working in the text, version after version, without acknowledging what it was. And then along the way, I thought, I think she takes her life. I thought, oh my goodness, okay, then I can't write it, because that's so dark, that's so awful, and who am I? Am I allowed to write about that? What does it mean to write about that? I don't believe in you can't, particularly in creative space, because it makes no sense, but I think there are things that I allow myself and don't allow myself. And one of the things I'm always so careful about is using certain things to entertain. And for some reason I thought, oh, like I don't want, like suicide, I don't want it, suicide, this is the dark. So I thought, okay, I can't touch that. And a long time I didn't, I refused, and it wasn't working. And my agent said to me once, she said, Yewande, if that's the story, you need to write that story. Give yourself permission to write the story and see. So it took a while just to come to writing that kind of story. And trying to understand and occupy that space. And eventually there it was, and then there were versions where I thought, well, okay, I have to write more about Yinka, and she has to occupy the story in a much bigger way. So there were versions of the book where you met her, and you met her girlfriend, and you met her life, and more of her art, and she occupied many more pages than she does. She's kind of a ghost in the book. Whereas in previous versions, she wasn't only that. So, I guess I'm sort of answering your question by saying there was there are these layers of approach, trying to get towards the final thing, and the willingness, the openness, the audacity to write what the story is, which is this loss, which is this immense loss, and this. I don't know that I thought I was looking at the theme of how I never looked at it with that lens, thinking it's about harming oneself and the ways in which you harm ourselves. I rather think what I thought a lot about was how harmful life is. And of course it's harmful in obvious ways. And in some ways, that's the easier part. But it's harmful in so many other small, insidious ways, unintentional ways. So I was thinking, like, the harm of being born into a family. And you're thrust into that family, and the traumas you inherit, the things your parents don't know because they can't know, because they're human, and they'll do their best. So I'm thinking of Mojisola's life and her childhood and what that taught her to go on to have her child, and what she could offer that girl because of what she'd been through. And Titus the same, the husband. So that's more kind of where I came at it from as a theme, less about the things we do to cope, and also the thing when we decide we can't cope. And more about just the ways in which life is dangerous. There's just so much, and it's painful, and it's hard, and it's harmful. And how do we recover? I'm always interested in that. How do you recover? How do you repair?
It's so, can I just respond to something Yewande said? It's so interesting that your book ended up being about suicide, because my book started with being a suicide. The main character, Cora, she falls in the book, and she falls, and then, the first versions, I kept on writing the suicide, this woman killed by the secrets that she carries. And it took me such a long time to write her back to life. And it was only actually now when you were talking about this, of how perfect that sounds for your story, but for mine, I had to write her back to life, because what I couldn't work out was, what do you do with the secrets of others that you carry, or that you think you might have colluded with in somehow the harm that she thinks she's caused? And it took me 2 or 3 years to write it so that she makes it through to... She finds a way of living with the harmfulness of life. So it's such a interesting kind of crossover. And my editor kept on saying, she has to find a way through. I suppose I had to find a way through. But that idea of resilience that...
It's so interesting, because one of the things I thought was, it's so dark. It's so dark to give up.
I just kept on thinking she could have a rest.
Well, that's what I thought was, we have one view of suicide, and there is a scene where, like I talked about how they beat the corpse in some cultures.
Yes.
Because it's so... And I wanted to write about it in a way that it didn't have to mean any of that.
Yes.
You know, it didn't have to mean that, and you're not punishing those that live, and you've done your best, and you're done. You know, and how can we be with that without? And it's hard, and I haven't had people directly to me lose their life in that way, but I sort of maybe a step or two removed. And I have lots of compassion for all that might happen in that space, but it's like, how can we look at it? Same with the sex. How can we look at it and even just for a couple of seconds withhold the judgment that's like there?
Exactly.
You know, for me, my thing with that is a conversation that a character has with her mom, where she expects her mom to do a thing to save them.
Yes.
And the mom is like, and he's like, I'm not participating. And this girl is confused. In fact, so no one commits suicide, but the relationship dies in that moment. Or rather, the daughter like takes note of, I'm losing her more and more. The daughter's losing the mother more and more, right? To this other thing that the mother's holding on to.
Yes.
Where for the first time, and for me that was a difficult thing to write, because you don't speak about mothers in that way, because they're supposed to be this box, this thing, right? And in writing it, I really felt like I was writing for my mom. I'm sure there were moments she would have said it, and then obviously felt bad about it, but in the moment she would have meant it. And that kind of freedom to be like, I don't want a mother.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't stop because this mothering thing pits me against myself.
Yeah.
Right? This mothering thing requires things outside of me where I have to compromise myself. Why does my love for you equal compromising my dreams for me?
Yeah.
You know? And that's when their relationship breaks in that moment. And with them saying Cora was a bad mom, I was like, what is a good mom? You know what I mean? What is that? I think it's fictional as hell. I think that's the myth. That's another myth. You know?
So now I want to step into engaging a bit with, because you know we talked about violence and bodies as sites of violence, and I'd like to talk a bit about bodies as sites of pleasure, which comes out a bit in all of your books, right?
Do you want a demonstration?
So we're going to talk about the erotic, and you are free to tell me about how you think about your bodies as sites of pleasure and the erotic. But we're going to start off with Yewande and... And so the question is, how do you think of your body as a site of pleasure? But also, Mojisola, in your book, like what I loved is how you break the trope of a middle-aged woman. Like she just gave me permission to like go out and have sex. I felt like that was the takeaway of the book.
Job done.
Job done. Like I was like, you, Mojisola, you go, girl. Tell us a bit about. Because I can also say that I did have to, like, while I did that, I had to Google some stuff.
Some of the...
And then they showed me pictures, and I was like, well, is it a pedal? Like, how? Wait, how?
And
I don't know what to do with it.
Yewande, you're definitely going to sell the most books after this session. You're definitely going to sell the most books, yeah.
Oh dear. I mean, it's so funny because I keep saying, "Oh, I didn't want to do it to titillate and like get sex sells," but hey,
That was completely the message of the book to me. Sorry, I'm one-dimensional.
That's what you walked away with.
You know what? I always sex and death. Desire and death, like these things are connected, and we know that, and we've seen it in art. And so early on, that was definitely something I wanted to write about. And I felt really, Mojisola is a made-up character, but I really reached out to, sort of mentally, to my father's cousins, for instance, and some of my mother's generation when I was writing her, because I could see that I would just get excited. And when I realized that I would write a bit more about that she would enter this kink life as part of her grief, and she finds a little door to come through it. It's actually a door that Yinka opens for her, and she enters into this life. I thought, whoo, like she's going to be a dominatrix, she's going to have her own business, she's going to just be whipping all these men. And I couldn't wait to write those pages, and Mojisala was like, that is not me. Like, I am not coming along with that book with you. You find another character to do that with, that is not me. And that was like my dad's cousins. So this is a Yoruba woman. I mean, really, Mojisola, she's living in South Africa, but this is a Yoruba woman, raised. So I had to, and that was interesting creatively, to sort of temper my own greed as a writer. Yes. I'm like, oh, this is great. How did I stumble on this? I was like, no, hold back, restrain, be right with her, represent her, don't let her down, and don't use her, and be greedy about what you stumbled on. So I was really, and I found that just interesting exercise as a writer to go through. But we found our path. I think at least that's what ended up in the book. This is the path where she explores. And what I love is, I just think it needs to get better and better. Like this nonsense of the older you get and society forgets you and you're not beautiful and you're not sexy and why don't we get sexier with age, for God's sake? Why don't we have better sex with age? I'm 42. I'm like, it has to get better. It's going to get better. And with a character like Mojisala, but even maybe my previous novel, when I'm writing these women, it's also I'm writing to myself, showing it gets really interesting if you stick around. If you can stick around. Not all of us will, who knows. But if you stick around and live that, it can get really interesting. Those are the stories that I'm interested in.
And in fact, it's something that my dad showed me. He passed at the beginning of lockdown. But he was in his 70s, and we would be having lunch, and I'd be like, are you swiping right on Tinder? And he would go, and then he would go on all these dates and stuff. And what I loved is that he showed me that you're alive until you are not. Wow. And, I tell the story over and over, but he would say stuff like, I went skinny dipping last night with my date, and I was like, you can't swim. And he was like, that's a technicality. I stood in the water naked. And it's like, oh my God. So wrong. But Margie, coming to your book, like there's a moment where you kind of feel the palpable sense of promise. And I don't remember it exactly, but it's sort of like Cora is abroad, she's working, she's at a conference, she's at a bath, she's feeling a bit lonely, and she's on social media, and somebody DMs her, and you feel the promise. And then as that relationship evolves, there's also this sort of sexual awakening, the sense of her body working for her. But unfortunately, it's like she doesn't choose the best guy to do this with.
I think with this book, it's if you're writing about death, you're always writing about sex, and I suppose. And one of if I can just take it back a bit, this is about eroticism that goes wrong.
Yes.
That goes really profoundly wrong, where she is not the object of desire, which can be a wonderful thing, but she does become it is about women as the object of the gaze, the sort of male gaze.
Voyeuristic gaze.
And that very scopic, piercing, pinioning thing. And what I was trying to access, I suppose, is it's a thing perhaps many of you in the audience will be familiar with. You're a little girl, you kind of don't think, you just kind of be. You're just in your body and you're running around and you're doing stuff, and then bam! That first time somebody looks at you, some uncle, some man, some mechanic, some guy, and you suddenly, I'm just getting goose flesh as I'm thinking about it.
You're conscious.
You're conscious that he's looking at you with lust and hatred and loathing, and you're exiled from yourself because you're here, but you're seeing yourself from this gaze of a man who's looking at you with that combination of hatred and loathing that seems to go with that particular kind of scopic desire. And I think most of us are exiled forever from ourselves. That's the split that we have to live with. And you can breach the erotic and come back, but Cora is involved. This is what she experiences as an adult woman, of being used in a way of a man whose desire is completely different. Yeah. But that split in the self is something I was very interested in how it can function. You can redirect it, but I really think it creates a profound split. And the epigraph of the novel is from a quote from Emily Dickinson, where the last bit, she says, "Abyss has no biographer." And I wanted to write about that invisible gap, which is where I think shame flowers. It comes in because you feel ashamed of yourself. Because this person is looking at you and you don't know what you've done, but you know you've done something.
Can I speak to that? Because we are all familiar with that moment. And you're not only conscious of the eyes on you, but then you're conscious that you have a body that...
Yeah. And it's not yours, it's taken.
Right? Now you're conscious of this body. You're a 10 and you didn't realize you had a body. You know what I mean? And then you looked at a certain way and then you become conscious of yourself. So then what the character does in Things My Mother Left Me is because she's so aware and she knows where that thing comes from and what it is, she uses it, right? Which is also not necessarily healthy, but that's how she takes her power back. So she becomes the predator. Yeah, because she's so disengaged from her own body, but she's like, you still can't have it, so I'll use it to the best of my ability, you know, to kind of punish or, you know, have some kind of revenge over the power you've always had over me.
I have to take a question. Oh my God, I'm going to be in such trouble here. They told me to end on time, and he's, oh my God, intergenerational trauma, lineage, I don't know. Can you quickly, I'm going to take one question from the floor, so that like the person who is most passionate has to like do a huge wave at me. But I also, when we take this question, Pulane, I want you to just speak to the pictures in your book as well.
Oh, okay.
Is there a person who desperately has to ask a question? I'm so sorry, people. I feel like I've sold you out in my greed for...
Everyone's sitting on their hands.
Okay. So can you talk to us about those pictures in the book and what you were trying to do with that? Like, for those who don't know, maybe just say something who haven't seen the book itself.
I'm a very visual person. So I write very visually as well. And I am really interested in, you know, expanding the landscape of storytelling, like in how many ways can you tell the same story? There's literature, there's images. If you could smell it, what would it smell like here? So there's a sense, right? If the story had a sound, what would it sound like? So there's a soundtrack, there's a, you know? So that's where the images come from. But also the images were just reimagining Eve. So I'm a born-again Christian, and I was raised in the Methodist church, and where the uniform is white and red. So I was like, and so I also understand the Bible, like there was the age of innocence and the age of consciousness, the age of innocence before Adam ate the fruit. So now let's use white cloth and imagine Eve as a thick woman from Transkei, right? Okay. And then when she gets, you know, thrown out of the Garden of Eve, what garden? Eden. This garden. When she gets thrown out of the garden, and she ends up in the township. And what the township does to her, now she's in the red. So I used the uniform that I was raised around. Also because that uniform is so significant in Black culture, right? African culture. And that's what the images were.
Yeah, they add a depth to the book.
Yes.
I feel that I've not begun to do justice to these, and also I'm not sure how to speak about the books in a way that doesn't give away too much. But they really are special, as I said, iridescent, effervescent books that the words just jump off the page, and they will sit with you for a long time afterwards. We didn't get to talk about that whole concept of intergenerational trauma and lineage, and the role of storytelling in connecting us to those who have gone before and those who are to come. But these are books worth buying, everyone. So please go out and find them. You will spend many a deep and happy moments immersed in them. So please do get them. A big thank you to my BFFs. Can I just say that?
Thank you, Joy. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.